Hello, my name is Zeta Ceti. I'm the CEO founder of Greenrush Consulting, and this is Professionally Cannabis.
Where do they go, the smoke rings I blow each night? Oh, what do they do, those circles of blue and white?
Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to our podcast. And Johnny, what is this podcast?
Well, it's difficult to say nowadays. I see you're halfway through eating a caterpillar cake, which makes me think it should be a culinary edition today. But today we actually have an interview with Zeta. Oscar, tell us about him.
Well, as you might be able to tell from the name, Zeta Ceti, he's a bit of a rock star. He's a Californian, old-school cannabis guy running a consultancy that has most of its operations in North America, but has global ambitions. He's a great guy, very funny, and I heard from his wife that he used to have dreads down to his ass.
Amazing. So that's what you meant about old school.
Amongst other things.
Well, I know I certainly enjoyed the interview when I gave it a listen through. I hope you do too. Listeners, enjoy.
Today's guest on Professionally Cannabis is Zeta Ceti. With 25 years of experience in cannabis, he co-founded Greenrush Consulting in Oakland in 2010, and since then has been following the professional cannabis trends all the way through, from its dreadlocks and mohawk stage to its professionalization at the ICBC in Berlin. Welcome to the show, Zeta.
Hey, thanks, Oscar. Nice to meet you too as well.
So, something we like to start off all our interviews with is a question: what brought you to the plant?
That's a great question. You know, to be honest, it's been a part of my life ever since I was 15 years old. I'm 41 years old now. The cannabis movement came out of the counterculture of the generations over the course of many decades. And you know, for me, it's always been almost like the creative experience because I'm also a musician too as well, right? So as I pursued my musical career, growing just came hand in hand with it. So that was really something that was really fascinating to me. And I've always had a great green thumb, right? I've always been really good at gardening, and so I thought I could, actually create a profession out of that, which I did for quite some time.
Good, and let's talk about that professional, because your company is more about consulting,
yes,
working with multi-state operators across the US, and also a tech platform, I believe, is coming on. Can
Correct.
you talk any about this to us?
Absolutely. So, ever since about 2009, we saw one of the first legalization bills in the United States, Proposition 19, that did not pass. It's bridged over from managing a very large cultivation site, which was about 400 lights, over to just doing things like SEO and selling online advertising to dispensaries and doctors and lawyers that are involved in the California cannabis industry, which is a complete 360 or 180 over to this other realm that people weren't used to at the time. I mean, honestly, if you had a website that talked about cannabis around that time, you had a target on your back from the DEA or the NSA, or all these guys were watching you, right? So it was a very interesting time to be in the industry. But what we saw was this sort of like beginning of a paradigm shift in cannabis policy we were trying to push as an industry. It was not just me, it was a lot of folks like all the activist organizations like NORML and Drug Policy Alliance and Students for Sensible Drug Policy, Marijuana Policy Project. All these folks we were supporting to help push policy at the federal level, but also at the state level too. But it was also a very much an enlightenment period for a lot of folks. So I went to, after I started moving over into this part of the industry in 2009. In 2010, in the city of Oakland, we were going to actually enact the city was going to enact these 4 large cultivation centers, the first of its kind in the entire United States, that were going to be regulated and they were going to be licensed. So I was a part of a team that was helping create the proposal process and then the RFP for that process to get these people licensed, because I was the next expert, talking to Fortune 500 executives, from supply chain tracking to laboratory testing to security. I mean, all these different standards we were creating in Oakland and pioneering that policy. Now, what happened was the federal government shut that down. They were like, you can't do this, right? So they shut that down. And then from that point, we saw all these other states like New Jersey and Arizona and Colorado come over to Oakland and ask us, hey, how did you guys do this? I mean, we want to adopt some of these standards over, because we're thinking thinking about putting out a medical marijuana law. So NORML and then several of these other groups were also pushing policies there. So all kind of like collided at the same time. And so I ended up co-founding this company called dispensarypermits.com. We were one of the first consulting companies going out there. And I went around the United States helping win licenses from New Jersey, Arizona, and Massachusetts. After that, I left that company and started Greenrush Consulting around 2011. And then from that point, going and moving forward through the most dynamic, radical processes all across the United States and helping people win licenses and going through the permitting process, perfecting it, and getting that done. Now, during that tenure of almost like six years now, I ran into a lot of challenges. What we were experiencing is too much demand and not enough experts. Okay, so and that still is true today. We're experiencing too much.
Is that demand from consumers?
Demand is from consumers and entrepreneurs, people that have, let's just say, a certain amount of capital, and they want to apply for one of these licenses. Maybe it's a lifelong dream. They do have a good green thumb, and they want to do commercial agriculture. Maybe they have a loved one that is dying from cancer and they just want to help them. I mean, there's so many different great stories that I've learned and seen, and it's pretty amazing some of the stories that you hear from some of these folks. But the most important thing is my business is I'm helping people get permitting and licensing and go through this dynamic compliance measure that states require and cities require. And so what I found, though, is that I can't scale my company. As an entrepreneur that started out, and I own 100% of my own company. I never took on investment. I'm trying to scale. Never, not a single time. And I turned it into, we generate, several $1 million a year at this point. It really got to a stage where I couldn't scale. I just could not find enough experts. I could not make these things fast enough. And I had too many clients coming through, and I was turning away a bunch of people. It's great. It's a great problem to have, right? Because you get to pick the cream of the crop, et cetera. And that's important for your success rates in going through this process. I wanted to be able to give access to a lot of folks, like reduce the barrier of entries that we see, provide more diversity to the industry, because you never know who the next person is that can find that new medical discovery that's going to help a lot of people. So I thought that was a very important principle and value to me, right? Not just, creating a new, a great successful enterprise, but also in pioneering laws and things, but also helping people is very, very important, giving access. So I went through this discovery process and asked myself the question. I was like, how do I, manage 100 clients, with one consultant or expert employee from a single platform? How do I do it, right? So what I went through is this discovery process over the course of the next couple of years, and this was just a couple of years ago, trying to figure out what kind of software, SaaS-based software technology out there that exists that either one, I currently use, or two, that can piece together for this. So I found out what that was. And so what I did was I took some existing pieces of technology and SaaS software that's out there today that I know that I personally use or that we use during the process, and I took the best pieces of all of it and then fused all that together to turn it into this new level technology. And this new level technology allows us to automate and accelerate the process. Now, it's impossible to fully automate, applying for a license application. And the reason why is because what states do is they release, let's just say a bill passes in a state, and they give you like 6 months to, kind of weigh in with public comment to affect the policy and regulations of the state. And then they have an application that gets released, and they release the application. You have 60 days to apply. I mean, typically that's the process, except for some, unique circumstances. So there's never a single way, at least at this stage, that we can be like sort of like LegalZoom or TurboTax, where it's like, this is a fixed thing. Now, eventually that's going to be like that. But the only comparison that I have to this particular technology is these sort of LegalZoom or TurboTax, because we're basically, you answer questions, it helps automate the process. But from that point, it spits out, all the documentation you need, where it can be up to hundreds of pages or thousands of pages, but all based on best practices and IP that we've developed over the last 10 years on this specific technology that we're going to build. And all this is being released this year. So you're getting the sneak preview of it. Right?
Listeners, you hear that? You're getting some
it's fantastic.
A-grade info before the markets.
But again, it's only applied to currently the US, because European laws is just getting off the ground right now. I mean, we're really seeing it. It reminds me a lot of the early days in California, of Proposition 215, where we have, for instance, like in Spain or in Barcelona, when I was just recently there, moderating a panel there for International Cannabis Business Conference, I walked into a lot of clubs there, and it reminded me a lot of early days of California in like 1996 and, early 2000s of how they used to operate. Whereas you see in other countries, such as Germany, pharmacies that basically distribute the medicine. So you don't have like delivery service. You don't have like distribution companies. We have multiple different tiers of licenses in the state of California. Everything from cultivation, manufacturing, dispensing, delivery and distribution. Those are probably the 5 biggest ones. We also have Type 4 nursery licenses, which focus on genetics and supplying, the cultivators. But it's still a fragmented supply chain. I mean, you don't get the appropriate amount of diversity and amount of consistency in the products because of that reason. So even then, in a state like California, where it's been there forever, right? You would expect that they would have a well-established regulation, but still isn't there yet. So it's really interesting to do that.
Do you
comparison.
see opportunities there, comparing California to Europe and the fragmented marketplace?
Oh, I see a massive amount of opportunity just globally. Okay, so for instance, like I think that anybody in the technology field isn't limited to just one country or one state or however you want to look at it. Like for instance, I can take, I don't know, some type of level of hardware technology for commercial agriculture, or we know is great for like manufacturing products, right? Or administration methods, or however you want to look at it, or education, right? And I could take that and I can license to other operators in other countries and other states. So I think there's that, like the limitation there is less than, let's just say, I'm trying to export to the EU. And let's just say I was an operator working with a Canadian LP. Well, wherever I'm producing that product in Canada needs to be aligned with GMP standards, get GMP standards, as well as the European monograph, right? So, and a lot of folks just haven't caught up to that yet to be able to export. They're trying to, and a lot of them have, right? A lot of these Canadian LPs have, and they're starting to do that now. Really have to really analyze how regulations affect the business model, right? And how regulations can actually stop your business, right? Because that happens in the United States too as well. I mean, we have things like 280E law, right? So 280E law is a tax law that says if you're selling an illegal substance, then you can't write off a bunch of stuff with your business like you normally can to help your business move along. It's federally legal. Banks we have the Safe Banking Act that looks like it's going to possibly pass here, but we haven't had banking. It's always been private money, mostly. It's always been, local credit unions that would work with, that aren't FDIC insured, that will work. But you can't get loans for this out of a bank, right?
And
so
did that affect your decision to maintain 100% ownership of your company? Was that due to the difficulties in financing, or was that more of a value statement?
No, it was owning 100% of my company was just a choice. I was able to do it because of this demand. I managed to scale my company to the level and degree that I was through the successes, obviously hard work, and just not really entertaining that. Now that I have a technology that I'm launching, now I'm partnered with a Canadian LP to get access to public markets and bring that in because it makes sense now. Now, as an entrepreneur, I think it's just a matter of what makes sense to you. And sometimes you can't go through traditional historical data to understand what that answer is. Sometimes you just got to, go with your gut and your heart to understand that, okay, this is the path that I got to go down. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, it was very difficult to do. I mean, a lot of my competitors, they got, private money, for them and were able to excel very quickly, but they still didn't have the same level of stamina and credibility that we had because we went through so much combat with this that we were able to understand, okay, this is how we dynamically, navigate this minefield of regulations and get through this process and do it all over the country. And then come back to California where it is a minefield of regulations because we have different regulations from city to county to the state level, right? And so it's like every other state's policy in one state. I mean, honestly, I have to thank, search engines like Google, even though they don't, really, follow by, the GDPR standards here in Europe, like as much, right? Or any social media. It's like, I understand that clearly, but because I was able to get, and because I was really good at search engine optimization and I was at an early stage in the industry, I was able to sow those seeds really early. So now if you can type in open a dispensary in any state in the entire United States and you'll find my company, right? So that's driven a lot of my track. So I just made a lot of good decisions at an early stage, even though I wasn't, a professionally trained business owner. I was just starting a business.
Did you have SEO experience before?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did have SEO experience. I got trained again. Like when I left the I guess, what you would call black market, cultivation,
unlicensed
business, unlicensed production or unregulated production, but there was no regulations really. I felt like it was just at the time, I didn't feel comfortable continuing to do it. And so that's when I left that and started in another realm, which is selling online advertising to, doctors, lawyers, and other dispensaries when it just started. Before you saw things like Weed Maps or any of that stuff, I was working on another company that was doing that. And then I also learned a lot about SEO through that process, right? So as I learned a lot about SEO through that process, I just applied it to my business. I was like, oh, I know this. I can do this pretty easily. And so my SEO strategy was, I'm going to create first off, I want folks to be educated before they call my sales team and they start drilling us with questions, right? I want them to understand, hey, is this a decision that you want to make? Because it's not for everybody, right? I mean, getting into the cannabis industry, you got to be ready for dynamic changes. You got to be able to understand policy and how it shifts very easily, and you got to be a risk taker. You just have to be. In our field, I mean, we have people that spend hundreds of thousands of dollars for a non-guarantee. Right, so that's another big point around this technology that we're launching, and the technology is called Odyssey. Okay, so that's ODDYSEE. It's not spelled the same, but what it means is journey, right? So your journey through the cannabis industry. So with this technology, it actually reduces that financial barrier of entry to where the difference is that you're spending a lot less to get a lot more, and your financial risk is mitigated, even though it's not completely mitigated. The risk is a lot lower, right? And so now this allows a lot more participation. It allows a lot more diversity, but also lets the high net worth individual or multi-state operator curb a lot of costs, because they're incurring a lot of costs associated with just operating the business and surviving in a flower-based market that's completely saturated, and trying to innovate new administration methods or new types of genetics, or however you want to look at it. So we really feel like it's going to scale the industry considerably, and we're really excited about it.
Interesting. So do you think you'll be getting your customer flow through similar avenues as before, search engine optimization, or once you have this new product, is there going to be a different route to the customer for you?
No, absolutely not. I think that it's just the compounded value of that customer route. So what I mean by that is that we already have a well-established pipeline of customers coming through us just through SEO. It's all organic search. I mean, truly it is. Again, we were fortunate enough to be ranked really high at a very early stage with certain keywords. And so we're able to just drive that traffic. So when I've never really had to do a marketing campaign. I've never had to do it because I never needed it, right? But now at this time that we're launching a new product, we've partnered with a Canadian LP called Alchemist, based out of Vancouver. And so what we're doing is we're partnering. So now we have access to capital markets, and then we have the brain trust and knowledge of all the experts, and bringing them through and just piecing this together to an end-to-end solution of technology, right? Which is also something that hasn't happened before. So when you look at technology in the cannabis industry, a lot of it is all post-license, meaning that, okay, after you win a license, then at that point, we want to serve you with inventory or seed to sale, tracking. We want to serve you all the way up to robots and AI inside your agricultural facility. All these people are focused, and all these companies are focused on this post-license. So we wanted to focus on pre-license, right? Because nobody's really doing that. And again, we feel like there's too much demand, not enough experts. Again, I could take all the experts and put them on a single team, and it's impossible to serve this demand. So I expect the same for Europe. I expect the same for Asia. I expect the same for South America. And as global partnerships or global communities come together and work with each other, we're going to find that, and it's all about innovation. It's really, really incredible, and I'm really thankful and grateful to be in this time right now. Period.
And I was interested about the Alchemist point as
sure.
you joining the board. So now you'll be a board member of a Canadian LP.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering, are there LPs or cannabis companies out there, competitors or otherwise, that you have an interest in, or that you particularly like what they're doing?
So again, a lot of the Canadian LPs seem like they're super focused on just the vertically integrated supply chain, right? And then how do they get into different markets? I mean, there's a lot of big ones out there, but they're also the ones that are doing a lot of innovation, right? So for instance, Kronos Group is looking at how do we create THC out of yeast and and things like that. Totally pioneering realm. You're not even growing plants now. Now you're just cultivating it out of yeast. You're creating THC out of yeast, right? Pretty amazing. You have other ones that are just looking at different factors like how do we create the most targeted infused beverages, right? So I mean, there's many different realms in which you can pioneer here, right? There is no shortage of that. In fact, that's all I see is complete innovation. It's really about what do you want to do. You don't have to be some major vertically integrated company that's selling flour and oil and everything. You could be an ancillary based business and get just as much opportunity out of this, if not more. You can remember back to the gold rush days. In the gold rush days, The people that were mining the gold weren't the people making the money, right? It was like Levi Strauss and Wells Fargo, and these people are supplying the picks, pans, and shovels. So that term's been coined around a lot. In fact, we were the first Greenrush company ever. Right. And now we have a lot of them out there. There's a bunch of them out there, but we were the first. And the way I like to look at this is like it's like a flow of water. And this water is moving whether you like it or not. And so you really have only a few choices. Like you can sit back on the sidelines and watch the water flow and just watch it happen and not do anything. You could actually, be in the middle of this and get pummeled, knocked down, buried, chewed up and spit out. I mean, literally will just do that to you. Or you can, wax your board up and start riding the wave. I mean, literally. So if you want to participate, then you only have a couple choices. It's fight or flight, swim or sink. It really truly is. It's different than prohibition. Prohibition of alcohol. So people think that, there's a lot of similarities, which there are. Like, for instance, we will see in a grocery, what you see in the alcohol section. So we have our brewers, let's say, like Budweiser, however you look at it, and they just take the same product and repackage it over and over again in different ways. And then you have your microbrews, right? And so we will see that in cannabis probably at a much more accelerated rate, but it gets way more in depth than that. Cannabis is a medicine. Cannabis is a textile. Cannabis is a fuel. Cannabis is a resource. There's so many different things out of it. I've even seen a recent article about how hemp fibers or cannabis fibers have electrical conductivity, and how you can take that and replace graphene with with that, which is being used in electric vehicles. So I mean, literally, the sky. I don't even know if there's a limit to this. I mean, it's really incredible what can be done with this plant, and it's been like this for thousands of years. So no one's ever died from cannabis, right? We as a society have been programmed ever since the 1961 treaty, by the UN, to be honest, and being programmed to think that cannabis is not this, when truly it is. And now we're here in the paradigm shift where everything is changing. And I'm really excited to see this happen. I think that I would encourage entrepreneurs to just not be afraid and not be in fear of, and just try to stay focused and try to go out there and, collaborate with other folks who are doing it, because it's happening.
And on that entrepreneur point, because I think we might have some listening, what would you say is the top 3 things they need to be prepared for as they move into this industry, especially European ones who might not have had the experience that you would have going back decades, say?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I have 3 things. One is that, you have just like with anywhere in innovation, you have like the ones that copy the ones that come out and do it better, right? That's one path, right? Or you have the ones that actually spark, create the spark of something new, right? And I would encourage them to create the spark of something new, because there's plenty of growth for that. Because just generally, like even health trends are changing that. It's more going towards oils. It's easier to test. It's easier to remediate. So I think that, when it comes down to it, it's really about believing in yourself, just like any other industry. Like, do you believe in the product that you're selling? Bottom line, doesn't matter how much money you have, doesn't matter how much experience or team or whatever. If you don't believe in what you're doing, then you might as well just forget about it, right? The second thing is that I would encourage people to educate themselves on this industry as much as possible. It does not matter where you are. You can be in Europe, you can be in the United States, Canada, South America, Australia. It really doesn't matter. But the education is very similar. The plan is very similar, right? It's all built on best practices, right? And so everybody's like kind of looking at each other and saying, okay, this is how we do this, right? And just building upon that and modifying it to their country or their state or however you want to look at it. And at the end of the day, also, there's a lot of things from other industries that are being brought into this industry. So you don't have to look too far for those standards, right? I mean, those standards, you can see the standards apply to this industry. I mean, it's general agriculture, right? Industrial agriculture. It's the same thing. It's just a plant, right? How do you do it better? How do you automate things? Same thing with retail, same thing with medical. And speaking of medical, the only place I feel like there's a lot more exploration is in medical, specifically related to targeted cannabinoid therapy and the exploration of these cannabinoids and their combinations, and how does that work for different qualifying illnesses? How does that work for folks? Because everybody's different, right? So what works for you, what may not work for me. The level that I titrate is much different than you, right? So I think that it's just all about how do we get it to where it's personalized, right? And so that is just a whole realm that hasn't been.
Does that relate to something you spoke on earlier at the conference today, the Endo-Canna Health, I believe it was?
Yes. That's a good friend of mine. His name is Dr. Len May. He's based out of Los Angeles. It's a company called Endo-Canna Health. and they can take your 23andMe data and translate it into what kind of cannabis products or strains or varieties that work best for you.
Have you had it done?
I have, yeah. And so it's really amazing. They sell test kits too that you can do your own swab. Now, the interesting thing about his company is not only they have like a dozen patents on this and the only one in the world that has these patents, but second, they also work with a company out of Australia that's a global company that focuses on drug-to-drug interactions. Okay, so for instance, if you had taking a high blood pressure medication, and how does that react to the cannabis? This is data that gets put into your personal data. So this way in which you're able to source your material or your products to be able to work best. The challenge with this is not with that particular methodology. The challenge is how do I source those products? Because we have such a fractured supply chain just globally, we're not able to source the products on a consistent basis, right? So it's very, very difficult to find something that works specifically for you. And I think that's where a lot, as we scale and as we grow and as things become more normalized, we're going to find those different methodologies into it to be able to create that. But right now it's a really exciting field. We plan on partnering with them and bolting them into our software as an API to help folks get more educated on themselves, which is pretty interesting.
The personalized medicine.
Yeah.
It's probably going to revolutionize a bunch of medicine, but makes sense that endocannabinoid system with all its complexity as one of the targets.
Well, I mean, everybody has an endocannabinoid system. Even your goldfish has an endocannabinoid system. I mean, your pets. I mean, literally, it's in there. But THC or CBD or cannabinoids bind to those receptors, CB1 and CB2. All those receptors, affect and regulate different things in the body. So this is something that has been a part of us since the beginning of time. And so now that we're able to go through this exploration, we're able to find things that work for us, which is way better than taking opioids or something that is synthesized in a lab and isn't natural. So I think that's highly interesting to us, and we're all about giving access to safe medicine.
And you just mentioned in your answer there CBD. Now, here in Europe, that's probably the largest cannabis product market.
Mm-hmm.
I feel California, it came out a little different. There was cannabis first and then CBD.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that Europe doing things perhaps backwards compared to California means the market will mature in a different way?
Well, actually, I mean, California is a different example. Okay, so California is the one that pioneered a lot of this. I mean, we pioneered a lot of this stuff. But when you look at other states that start with a CBD, I'll give you an example like Texas. Okay, so Texas created an all CBD bill. Florida's the same way right now. But they came out with an all CBD bill where it needs to be 0.3% THC or less, and it's only designed for patients with epilepsy. Okay, so there's probably about 150,000 patients there, and we call that a soft bill. But a lot of times, what it is it's a kind of almost like an introductory, pilot program for a medical marijuana bill or even an adult use bill, right? So I'd almost expect that Europe would follow that same kind of path where we're like, okay, we know it works for folks, right? We know it helps with inflammation. We know it helps with certain types of conditions. So we want to, allow European citizens to have access to a different alternative form of medication instead of the traditional routes. We know it helps with epilepsy. We know it helps with certain things. That this has already been proven, right? Even though it hasn't been proven in a sense of clinical trials per se, but in some cases, but it's still
you've got Epidiolex, so we've got a baseline for it,
right? I mean, in addition to that, it helps boost the economy. It creates jobs. It creates tax revenue. Right. And so, I mean, a lot of countries are looking at this as well as a lot of states. Right. So we've seen this in kind of like a micro way, whereas a macro way would be a whole country doing this. And so I think that when it comes to Europe, yes, I do think that we will see that path open up more as more regulations get tighter and more understood and more education and awareness is happening. I mean, it's happening every single day. More and more. We're seeing a lot of politicians and people in the government understanding this more, becoming more acceptant of it. Again, I don't know if you saw that on January, I believe it was January 27th, that the World Health Organization, was like, we want to change cannabis from a Schedule 5 to a Schedule 1, right, which was the lowest.
The medical change.
Yeah, that change, right? So, and then they want the UN to vote on it. They propose this to UN. I mean, that's amazing, right? So we're seeing
first time in 50 years, I think.
Yeah. So we're actually seeing action happening by these governmental bodies who first instilled the war on drugs back in 1961, to now dismantling it from the top down, right? Which is really interesting to see. Once that happens, then we're going to be able to see the proliferation of growth. And then from that point, it's really up to every country or every state or every city or however you want to look at it to make their own decisions and make the decisions responsibly. I mean, we don't even have a responsible use platform in the United States in terms of on-site consumption, right? We don't have a mechanism at the state level in California to get a license to have people consume responsibly as opposed to being out in the public and consuming, right? So that's a whole other pioneering realm
And
that we're looking at.
Is that coming in the near future?
Yeah, we're looking at that because there's got to be ways. I mean, look at Las Vegas. I mean, there's just Las Vegas, Nevada. I mean, you know, they understand gaming, they understand vices, they understand these things. So they're really good at creating regulations. However, we don't have any social on-site consumption places for people to consume responsibly in a place that's secure, that doesn't cause complaints because of odor, or allow people to experience a lifestyle brand within a consumption space, right? Where it's everything's just kind of regulated in that way. Same thing with edibles. So you don't have like places where you can go and it's regulated, where proper dosing administration is done on perishables. So let's just say I wanted to cook a nice, I'm a 5-star chef and I want to cook an amazing meal for people that are coming into our restaurant. There's no way for me to legally infuse that because it's perishables, right? So I mean, I think that we're getting to the science aspect of it, where we're able to understand more and more and more and more as we collaborate into the brain trust of the industry of all these different experts. And that's something that us in California, we've gone all across the United States, if not all across the world, to share that knowledge with the rest of our global counterparts. That way people understand what we're experiencing and what we're seeing. Because we are farther ahead than let's say, Europe, but Canada is farther ahead of us in terms of a country legalization standpoint. So they have first mover access. So that's part of the reason why you're seeing a lot of Canadian LPs work in different spaces where it's legal, so they can remain listed on the exchange there, the Canadian Securities Exchange, or even like listing on our exchange, which is NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange, right? And being able to do that. So it's just really interesting how all this is playing out. And I feel like us in California, even though we're the 5th largest economy in the world, pioneering this for so long, our federal government still hasn't let us get to that point yet. I don't know. It's crazy.
Well, I think we've got time for one more question.
Sure.
So on that point, let's imagine federal legalization comes. Europe's now a market ready.
Mm-hmm.
Odyssey is ready, released,
Mm-hmm.
and you're expanding your team to go into Europe. Who's the person you hire? Who's your dream hire to lead your European expansion? Who do you like to work with?
Oh, wow. Okay. So, I mean, again, I think because, I haven't really thought about that because there's a lot of red tape here. Like, for instance, like in Germany, there's a lot of red tape, right? There's not many licenses, right? It's not like your local, pharmacy can get this license, right? So it's very different. Whereas in the United States, we're experiencing, like, we got a certain amount of license that we're able to get. Some states, are rolling. So I feel like right now it's the right time to release in the US, but, in a future date when, the normal average citizen that has, a certain amount of capital and wants to open, just like opening a restaurant or opening up, any type of business, that is going to be fantastic for us. And we will have offices here in Europe just serving this European marketplace. Now, in terms of federal legalization, that's going to literally blow this thing wide open. It's definitely coming. And so from the California perspective, I feel like just like California has always done with movies and music, or however you want to look at it. It's
culture to an extent.
Yeah, it's going to be culture. It's going to be brand. Okay, it's going to be brands, right? It's not going to be mass scale production, but we are going to have a certain level of innovation in terms of doing research and R&D on genetics, doing certain things like that, right? But in exports too. Exports. So you'll see global exportation. You'll see interstate distribution. I think in the United States, where we're going to see a lot of that production is the Midwest, because that's all industrial agriculture right now, right? And we're seeing states like Oklahoma and Missouri and all these middle states have that already predisposition for industrial agriculture. So we're going to see a lot of these convert over, and then from that point, we're going to see a lot of that just be exported out of the United States. Now, again, do I think that's going to be the place in terms of cost of goods sold? Probably not. I mean, we're going to see places like Colombia, like I'm speaking in Colombia and Cartagena between May 9th and 11th at Expo Cannabis, and some of the things we're seeing down there is like a much lower cost of goods sold. I mean, things like $3 an ounce, 10 cents a gram. I mean, people are producing at that
At
rate.
that cost now.
Yes, absolutely. And then you see things like, okay, well, in terms of CBD production, you could probably go to Africa to do that. And the cost of CBD production is so much less, right? So when it comes down to actual production, it is a commodity. It is honestly a race to the bottom, unless you can get really creative. And so I'm just going to give you a quick tip. One of those creative ways is to start researching genetics and taking those genetics and licensing them to big operators who are operating in a space. And now you can accept royalty agreements from those operators when you work with these partnerships, right? So now you have big players that are all aggregated, sometimes consolidated, and maybe there's a lot of mergers and acquisitions that are going to happen for sure. These big players can license your strain that you grow in your lab or you create in your lab that produces the right phenotypes, that has very targeted results, however you want to look at it, medical or adult use. And from that point, that's a way to scale. So instead of scaling by footprint, you're scaling by IP, right? Yeah. And I think that's just a fascinating thing to do, as opposed to saying, okay, I'm going to go at it with major industrial operations, right? It's like something of the past, really, unless you got some serious, capital and infrastructure behind you. So, I mean, I think that at the end of the day, once Europe comes online, and everybody can work with each other, which I think is something that's going to bring a lot of a global, community and ties together, which I think is fantastic. At that point, we will see critical mass and we'll see a lot of interactions between us that we didn't have before, right? Which is fantastic. And we're also helping people in the same token. So I think that's amazing.
On that wonderful note, thank you very much. You've been a wonderful guest.
Thank you very much, Oscar. All right.
We hope you enjoyed that interview. And if you did, please feel free to leave a nice review, and pass the pod on to a friend or colleague.
That's it from us. Join us next week for another episode of Professionally Cannabis.